I was recently reacquainted with some of my childhood herbarium and fungi collections. It was a fun trip down memory lane, seeing my drawings and neatly pressed plants and fungal spore prints all neatly laid out on the pages of my notebooks. Preserving plants helps preserve a moment in time. So when the opportunity arose to tour one of the largest herbariums in the world at the New York Botanical Gardens, I jumped at the opportunity to see what a world-class collection of nearly 8 million plant and fungi specimens looks like.
This is where everything comes into our herbarium straight from the field. So everything is just bound together, usually in a newspaper or another absorbent paper material. This is where they stay until they are identified, and then at that point, this wall is all of our specimens waiting to be mounted.
Wow.
So from here, they will go up to the mounting room and go through the workflow that way. Job security.
Yeah, look at that.
My name is Kelsey Brown. I am the Herbarium Collections and Data Coordinator here at the New York Botanical Gardens William and Linda Steer Herbarium.
Woo.
And this is just one typical floor of our herbarium out of the 4 full floors we have, full of nearly 8 million specimens. And today we're just gonna take a closer look.
8 million specimens, where does that put you or rank you in the world of herbariums?
So with our 8 million specimens, we are the largest herbarium in the Western Hemisphere and among the top 4 largest in the world. That kind of changes from year to year, but it's always stayed about at that rank. So,
is it a cooperation or a competition?
It's cooperative. Yeah, we have great working relationships with other herbaria. We're always constantly exchanging material with other collections and working together to help preserve these plants for long-term research.
We think about herbariums, we think of old specimens, but how often are you getting new specimens in?
So we get around 30,000 new specimens every year. We have collections from as far back as the late 1700s, but we are actively adding to our collection every year. Just a little bit on the origin of our herbarium. These are specimens collected by Elizabeth Britton and Nathaniel Lord Britton.
Oh, who started the New York Botanical Gardens, right?
Yeah. So the Brittons founded the garden in 1891, and with that, we were able to establish our herbarium. They wanted to have the Kew of the Americas. They were really inspired by their visit on their honeymoon actually to Kew, and they wanted to establish an institution that really could be the leaders in plants of the Western Hemisphere. And that's how the garden came about and how our herbarium came about. So these were collections that they did themselves, actually. Elizabeth was a great bryologist.
So she studied mosses and
yes,
stuff.
so Elizabeth was a great bryologist studying mosses. Nathaniel Lord Britton was a specialist in Cactaceae, the cactus family.
I'm sure you had a harder time than Elizabeth actually pressing specimens.
Oh yeah, we'll see some pickles, what we affectionately call pickles, of how we can preserve the fleshier, larger specimens as well. And this is a specimen collected from the Elgin Garden, which was the first botanic garden in the United States. It's where Rockefeller Center is now. So you think about
really?
people, yeah.
So there's no longer a garden there.
Yeah, it unfortunately shut down and was originally sold to Columbia University, and then now is where Rockefeller Center stands.
Oh, and this is what it used to look like.
Yes, so that's why.
Tragic.
But that's also, that explains why Rockefeller Center is able to have such a large area that's not cut through. Yeah, it's not bifurcated by the roads because the avenues worked around that garden at the time.
Yeah.
On the site, he developed the famous Elgin Botanic Garden, which is open from 1801 to 1811.
Oh, okay, so it was only 10 years.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But still the first botanic garden in the United States.
Yeah,
so.
very cool to see.
So these are some fun specimens in our collection. This right here really is a good example of how well these plants preserve over time. This came from the Captain Cook's expedition down to the southernmost tip of South America, and it was collected actually in 1769, and you can see how well preserved that is. We haven't changed these methods of preserving in hundreds of years. If something's not broken, don't fix it. So it works really well just by pressing these plants, making sure they're dry, and then affixing them to these 100% cotton sheets. That really is all you need to preserve the plants for long-term research. So, and then we also have Darwin specimens. This was a moss that was collected by Charles Darwin himself, as well as like some other tiny little liverworts we have here in these little packets. They're
Oh my goodness.
quite tiny. But
Wow.
tiny little liverwort collected by Darwin. Original like uses of herbaria, people were, trying to track these plants both for like medicinal research and understanding the world around them. And traditionally, curators could focus on like a particular family of plants. Like this is all dedicated to the Pinaceae, which includes this big guy here. Or they could also focus on a region of plants. So instead of focusing on one particular family, this focuses on intermountain flora. So this is all the plants in the intermountain US. And today, our curators are active, especially in Brazil. Doug Daly, one of our curators, works with forest workers in Brazil to help them like identify trees so that they know right away what they are looking for to cut down, collects all over, but especially in like Acre and Rondônia. And then we also have our IEB collection, which it focuses on the uses of plants.
What is IEB? Is it ethnobotany or what?
Yes, sorry. So our IEB collection, IEB stands for the Institute of Economic Botany.
Okay.
And so that focuses on the use of plants like ethnobotanically or as food sources. So like here we have this plant. You can see our collection labels. A normal collection label such as this would have the collection number, what it is, the family it's in, where it was collected, who collected it, and when. Now our IEB labels have all of that, plus how the plant is used. So for this one, the tubers can be used as a food, like our potatoes, think of that. And then the leaves could be used for treating rashes or other skin diseases. So these labels really work with local communities to try to understand those ethnobotanical uses and record those so that we can preserve that information. This is a fun one because this is curare, which a lot of people may know as the plant that is used to tip poison darts, which is actually a neurotoxin and paralyzes what the hunters are hunting. And today is actually used in surgery, like heart surgery, because it affects the beating of your heart, so it can help during surgery.
Do they extract it from the bark or the leaves or?
Yeah, so with curare, they will make a tea from the leaves to concentrate the neurotoxin, and then they can dip the darts in it. In our herbarium, we work with the rest of the garden to preserve in some ways some of our exhibitions. Most recently, we had this beautiful exhibition, the African American Garden, that was part of the Edible Academy. It showed a lot of crops and other plants that are very important, and this is just one gorgeous example that at the end of the exhibition, we collected this, and now we're able to preserve it in our collection so we can have a record of that.
Yeah, it's a nice ornamental plant as well.
And this is rice. So it's also important that we collect wild relatives of crops, especially like rice and wheat, which are very important worldwide as a food source. The collections help us to find native relatives that could be used to introduce more resistance to things such as fungi or other pathogens.
Yeah, I mean, this is even though they're dried and on cotton paper or whatever, this is a genetic repository at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that's something that's really amazing and also intriguing about herbaria is that we've been collecting plants for hundreds of years. Like the first herbarium was opened in it was created in the 1500s. So we've been collecting plants for such a long time. And at that time, we didn't even know what we would be doing with them today. Like today, we can extract DNA from
can you imagine somebody in the 1500s and being like, eventually we'll be able to, and you had no concept of that even.
They had no idea. And so that's why a lot of our work, we're not working for ourselves really, we work really hard to preserve these plants for the future and for future generations because we can't even conceive of what they might be using these for in hundreds of years. And it's really important that we have that snapshot in time of where these plants were, what they were found with, how they grew, when they flowered, when they leafed out, all these things. It's going to be so important for future research.
I even had a friend recently, side story, that Coreopsis is, the tick seed is typical in like meadow plantings and things nowadays. I don't even think it's native to New York, but he went back into some herbarium specimens and saw that they look so different from the cultivars or the ones that are being distributed now. So even just having type specimens really help.
Yeah, we have a large type collection actually. We have about 150,000 types. And if you think about that, there's like about 350,000 plant species that we know of. So we have a large representation here that is constantly used to look back and see if it's a new species, see how similar it is to the original Basionym, everything like that. So
here's one of your pickle examples.
Yes, so sometimes a plant is too fleshy or too large to properly be pressed and preserved on the sheet. Most of our specimens we can fit on the sheet. Our mounters are very skilled. But other times, like with this Ladoicea, the double coconut, endemic to the Seychelles, we have to put them in boxes and house those in our oversized collection. Or this prickly pear, we had to preserve it in alcohol so that it maintained its fleshiness.
So does that get stored also in the herbarium, or does this go in elsewhere in another section?
We do have some of our pickles in the herbarium. Some also are over at the Pfizer lab. Yeah, they're mostly here as part of our oversized collection, along with giant palms.
Can't get those on a big enough sheet of paper.
This is an example of some important research that one of our curators is currently working on. This is the standard of the North American plants. It was last updated a few decades ago, and we know through herbarium specimens and just from existing in the world that plants move and change over time. So now, Rob Noxie, one of our curators, he specializes in North American plants. He is actually working on an update to this manual of vascular plants, and that's very exciting. So we're really excited about that.
That's gonna be.
Oh yeah. Speaking of that, herbaria can be used for phenological studies. This is one interesting example we like to bring out. These are both the same plant collected relatively close together. They're both collected in New York, but you'll notice that this one from 1891 was flowering on June 16th.
Wow.
Now, if you look at this one collected in 2011, it was flowering a full month earlier.
Wow.
And, you know, like in a true phenological study, we'll have hundreds of examples, but this is just, you know, one really stark example to show.
Yeah, and you don't know if it was an off year or, you know, but this has a lot of ramifications too, because if you think about co-evolved relationships with pollinators or specialist insects or anything along those lines.
And that's why it's important to have many records of one species too. Like one record is not gonna cut it. Like even as like humans, you know, we're all different, one person to the next. And so we need multiple collections of the same species over time in different places, in the same place, like because things could be different. You don't know if it's like an internal thing that changed that or if it's an environmental change. So it's all important.
The other thing too is you could go to maybe books or records written in that year and see how people were talking about the weather, if it was kind of an unusual season or
This is actually extinct in the wild now. This is a silver sword from Hawaii. So we're left with just this specimen in our herbarium, which is kind of sad to see, but also, you know, we're thankful that we have this record. So we know that it was around, even though we can't find it in the wild anymore. I know one thing we get asked a lot is if seeds in our packets are viable and can be grown.
So it's not technically a seed bank. It probably wasn't stored, you know, in a way. But you know, you can't, you know, you could possibly try.
But so in our herbarium, you know, it's not likely that the seeds would be able to be viable because we don't store our specimens the same way that a seed bank would. But we're preserving other important information, and you can get DNA from these. So, and again, who knows what we'll be doing 300 years from now.
Yeah.
Another important use of herbaria is tracking, you know, the introduction of invasive species.
Yeah, look at that. This is a, you know, purple loosestrife, right?
Yeah, and this was our first known record of purple loosestrife in the Americas. So we have that record of that invasive species that everyone is now familiar with, and so we can track range through time. And a lot of people are probably familiar with the American chestnut. It was one of the dominant tree species in America until the fungus blight, the chestnut blight. So interestingly, we actually have the type specimen of the chestnut blight here. And a type specimen is the collection that is used as the representation of that species. So this was the first collection of that where we were like, okay, this is definitively a new species, and now we can go back and reference this type. These small little dots here, kind of orangey looking dots on there, that is it. That's the chestnut blight. And this type was actually collected right here in Bronx Park. So everything is in these compactors, which helps us to maximize the space. And the way that we organize our specimens, with 8 million specimens, it's really important that they're well organized.
Yeah.
So they're organized first by family, which each actually gets assigned a family number so that families that are more closely related to each other are close together rather than doing it alphabetically by family. And then within that, we do it alphabetically by genus, then by geographical area. So we'll have like everything of maxillaria from like US and Canada, and then everything from Mexico and Central America, West Indies, South America, et cetera, et cetera. And then within those regions, they'll be arranged alphabetically by species. You can see we have different colored folders for different regions. All of the manila folders are things that are in the Americas and the West Indies. And then once you get up to Europe, those are in these green folders here. So Europe is green, and then we have yellow for Africa, red for tropical Asia, purple for Northern Asia, blue for Pacifica, and orange for Australia and New Zealand.
And when was this organizational structure done? I mean, was it done right in the beginning, or did somebody have to come through and say, okay, now we're going to reorg this?
So it was all organized in this way starting in the 40s.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also a lot of work as these species get re-identified over time.
Oh yeah, of course.
Because like now we're into APG4. We've just finished moving over to APG4, which is the accepted arrangement of plants. So we had to reorganize our collection to reflect that, so that we have these specimens properly arranged under their accepted names. Oh, these are indets, so we could also talk about indets. These are Tillandsia indets from Mexico and Central America. So an indet is just something that we don't exactly know what it is yet. So we know that these are in the genus Tillandsia, but we're not sure of the species. So when we house these in our collections, and researchers can come from all over the world, we have about 250 researchers that visit us every year, and they may be an expert in this genus, and then they might be able to identify it as species, or it might turn out to be a new species. Majority of new species are actually already collected and sitting in herbaria just waiting to be identified.
Right, that's a really good point. And then nowadays, when people are taking herbarium specimens, I mean, obviously it leaves much to the imagination because they get dried and maybe a little bit brittle. Obviously you could still look at their DNA, but do people take like photos now, and now you could access photos with the herbarium specimen? I'd imagine just to kind of preserve the color or where it was at, or?
Yeah, so there is a lot of talk about like the extended specimen. And so a lot of the metadata we do just record on the label already, like they might have field observations of like color or scent or things like that. But also we can now link field photos to the specimens as well as like DNA vouchers and things like that. And we do that all in our database, and also do our best to make them available online when we can.
What is the process of actually digitizing and making them available for folks?
So first, All of our collections come in from the field. They're dried, they're pressed, they're mounted to the sheets, and then they get barcoded, and at that point they will go to our imaging lab. Lovely volunteers. We're very thankful for our volunteers who will come in and image those for us, and then we'll process them, put them online. Once again, so thankful for citizen science. We will have people then digitizing them by transcribing the labels for us, and then from that point, they can go into our system and eventually online, which anyone can access through our CV Star virtual herbarium.
Is there any implications for that on conservation side to make these things more available? I can imagine that it's great for people who are studying them, but I would imagine that it's also great for people who are interested in poaching plants. Is there any kind of consideration for that?
Yeah, that is a very good point. And we do actually account for that. When sensitive information is included on the label, whether that be the location of an endangered plant or whether that is like indigenous knowledge of a plant that we've been entrusted with that we don't necessarily have permission to disseminate, that will be blurred before it goes online. And so then that way we can protect that information while still having the accessibility of the plants.
What do we have here?
So here we have a lady slipper, Cypripedium acale. This was collected in Ontario, Canada. And sometimes nowadays we can connect field photos digitally to the specimens, but back then, like in here, 1962, sometimes they would affix the field photo actually to the sheet.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and other ancillary materials such as letters sometimes when they were corresponding about a species. There's a lot of cool things that you can find in a herbarium. So,
what's this coming out of the? Is it's like
yeah? So that is not standard curatorial practice nowadays, but I guess to preserve the shape, then they had stuffed it with some cotton just to help preserve the shape of those lady slippers. It's accepted practice anymore, but it's an interesting relic.
Yeah, it was his signature way of collecting.
Yeah, these specimens here are all
You're like, there goes Mo again, stuffing his orchids with cotton swabs.
All right, so, that's how it works. Everything just gets put into these light boxes so that we can get even light all around the specimen.
Yeah.
Close the door, hit the button, and then we have a high quality.
Wow, how many of these can you do in an hour? That's really fast.
Depends on the person. I think if you're really fast, you can get up to a couple hundred in an hour.
Yeah. You dialed it in.
And everything has an associated barcode. We have.
But you have to barcode it first too, probably.
Yes. Yeah. And we have these color grids too, so that we can make sure everything is as close to true color as possible, so that they're represented in the best way possible online. Everything gets stamped, imaged. When it's done. All right, so all of our images go onto our virtual herbarium. This is CV Star Virtual Herbarium, and this is the herbarium's launch page within the New York Botanical Gardens website. As you can see, we have about 8 million specimens, and over half of them have been digitized. Anyone can go online and see our collections through our virtual herbarium. You can do a quick search if you're looking for a particular plant or a collector, as well as more advanced searches where you can put in all this specific data. But yeah, so we saw Cypripedium downstairs, and you can see the collector and collector info, when it was collected, where it was from, anything that you would get on the specimen label itself. And they also have their associated image where you can
That's great. This is so user-friendly.
There'll be more tips and tours here at Plant One On Me. If you enjoy these videos and gain value from them, then I'd ask if you can return the value through a like, subscribe, tip, or even become a sustaining member of the channel. You can find out more about that and our suite of online houseplant courses over at homesteadbrooklyn.com. I'll see you in the next video.